Mask of a Diva, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 4, 1994. Author, Grant Michaels. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York. Author, Eric Aust. For all the divas, operatic and otherwise. Chapter 20. Before Branco began his serious questioning, he had one of his assistants draw the draperies across the library windows to darken the enclose the huge room. Meanwhile, Branco himself went about the room and turned on some of the reading lamps, choosing them strategically to give a gothic, sinister feeling to the place. He seated himself directly center along the length of the library's study table, which was a long, broad slab of solid mahogany. On either side of him sat the assisting officers, looking very much like they were preparing for an afternoon fete. At the Grand Inquisition, the inquiry's chair was placed opposite Branco's seat, on the other side of the wide expanse of tabletop. I was out of the way, slouching in one of the leather-winged back chairs off to one side, where I could quietly and almost invisibly observe the goings-on, while I also perused the security report. A Gemini prefers to do things at once. The first person Branco called into the library for questioning was Mathilda, the late Madama Ostinata's personal maid. Mathilda entered the wood-paneled room with her head held confidently high. Even in the subdued light, her eyes appeared clear and open, with no sign of redness. The shadows under them had somewhat faded as well, but that could have been an effect of Branco's dramatic lighting. Most noticeable was Mathilda's keen awareness of everyone and everything in the library. She had obviously recovered from her screaming jag that morning. Branco began with some standard questions, and Mathilda's answers provided some standard facts. Her last name was Marceau. She was 40 years old, although she looked and acted like a woman whose life had been a much longer succession of disappointments. She was an orphan, and Marcella Ostinata had rescued her long ago, and had become like an aunt to her. Mathilda claimed the one great fortune of her life was to have been Madama Ostinata's personal companion for 25 years. She even pulled herself up higher from her already ramrod straight posture to make this pronouncement, and she purposely looked Branco straight in the eye as she spoke. And I detected a lie. Mathilda may have enjoyed the luxury of traveling the world with a great diva, and packing her trunks and setting out her costumes, but I didn't sense any genuine gratitude there. Mathilda was, after all, no matter what fancy label you gave it, a piece of hired help. Branco asked her about the previous night. Was there anything unusual from the usual pattern of things? No, said Mathilda. I gave Madama her nightly potion. Then I opened the doors to the balcony and I left her. You say you opened the doors? Yes, said Mathilda, just a tiny crack. Were they open all night? Yes, whenever she was in the country. Madama liked to sleep in the fresh night air. Branco fiddled with his pencil for a moment. The library became dead silent. There were 5 of us in there, and you couldn't hear a single breath. Branco finally spoke. Miss Marceau, isn't it unusual for a great singer, especially an Italian? You see, I'm Italian myself, so I'm somewhat familiar with these things. Wouldn't a singer be afraid of the night air getting into her lungs? The night air is dark and often damp. Some people say it carries the forces of evil with it. Perhaps Madama was superstitious? Mathilda considered Branco's question carefully. She sensed a trap, although what he'd said was true. Morning, noon, and night, singers are extremely weary of the air. Then she answered him simply. Madama was not afraid of the night. She was not afraid of anything. Then perhaps she was expecting someone, said Branco. Maybe that's the real reason Madama wanted the balcony doors ajar? Miss Marceau? Was she expecting a guest? Mathilda glared at him. You are a pig! Where did you sleep? Said the cop, quickly changing tack. My room is next to hers. Always. Wherever we go, I am next to her. Do your rooms connect directly? Branco already knew the answer to that question, even I did, since we'd both inspected Madama's room and the outside terrazzo earlier that day, so why was he asking it? Mathilda said, no, there was no door between our rooms. Except for the balcony, said Branco. Your rooms both face out to the balcony. Yes, said Mathilda, a bit uneasily. Branco got up from his chair and walked around the table, then sat on one edge of it to continue his questions, which placed him above and over her. Mathilda shifted in her chair so that she wouldn't have to twist her neck to face him, although she'd still have to look up to see him. She seemed to be familiar with Branco's kind of sport. Branco said, tell me about Madama's potion. Mathilda answered flatly. The potion was to give her sleep. She had much distress from the rehearsal yesterday. Some people did not treat her well with the respect deserved by the great. So it was a sleeping pill, said Branco. No, said Mathilda sharply. No pills. Madama did not like pills because they might hurt her throat. Her medicine was always a potion. A liquid, then? Yes, said Mathilda. I mix it for her every night. Branco nodded silently, then asked, are you a pharmacist, Miss Marceau? Mathilda looked at him blankly. Branco went on. You say you mixed the potion for her. How did you know how much to mix? Mathilda said, it was the same every night. The doctor explained it to me. And last night's dosage was the same as usual? Yes, said Mathilda, but her voice extended the syllable uncertainly. Was that a yes? Said Branco. Yes, replied Mathilda more resolutely. Miss Marceau, by tomorrow morning I'll have a full report of the contents of the dead woman's stomach, as well as a complete rundown of her blood chemicals. Do you understand that? You are like an animal, she said. Once again, Branco ignored her insult. Do you want to reconsider your answer one last time, he said. Was the dosage of Madama Ostinada's sleeping potion the same as usual last night? Mathilda squirmed uncomfortably in her chair. I will tell you again, she said defiantly. The potion I mixed for Madama last night was correct. She stared at Branco, and he stared back. Mathilda had called Branco an animal, yet there she was, facing him like a stray cat, trying in vain to claim its territory. She didn't realize that she was challenging another cat, the king of all cats, an astrological Leo, just like Daphne. As if finally recognizing her error in judgment, Mathilda shrank back slightly and mewed. Except for one thing. And what was that? Said Branco with a big grin. Mathilda's answer was strained. Madama insisted. What could I do? The question to answer is, what did you do? Mathilda's eyes had suddenly reacquired that pained look, the look they'd always shown before Madame Ostinada's death, the look that said, I cannot help what I am, it is my destiny. She turned those eyes up toward Branco and spoke in a hoarse whisper, worthy of a Macbeth witch. I mixed Madama's potion, and she took it and drank it as usual. But then she demanded I mix it again. She wanted it to take the potion a second time last night. I told you she had great distress from the rehearsal. Yes, said Branco, you did tell me. Mathilda's voice became more animated as she spoke. And now I think if I did not do that, Madama would be alive. Her words came louder and faster. Madama would have awakened and called out for help, and I could have saved her. The crescendo and accelerando continued. But instead, someone came into her room, and she never woke up, and they killed her. Climax. Mathilda broke down into tears and sobbing. Branco let the woman cry for a few moments, as though his book of police rules had instructed him to display some compassion toward witnesses in distress. Then he asked her, How can you be so sure, Miss Marceau? Mathilda looked up at him. I told you that I gave the potion to Madama 2 times. I mixed it myself. Yes, I know, but how can you be sure that Madame Ostinada didn't cry out for help? You were in the room next to hers, and the room on the other side of hers was empty. Perhaps she did cry out, but you paid it no heed. We know that Marcella Ostinata was an extremely difficult and demanding woman. Perhaps after 25 years of waiting on her night and day, perhaps this time you just didn't feel like running to her side. Mathilda glared at Branco. You are a monster to say such things. I was ready to die for her. Branco changed tack again. Tell me how you found Madame Ostinata this morning. Mathilda squirmed uncomfortably. It was not the usual way, she said. I should say not, Tal. Madama always was awake with the sun, and every day she checked the voice. But this morning I did not hear her singing, so I went to her room. I thought it was the extra potion that made her sleep, but then I see her chin began to quiver. Was anyone else in the room? Mathilda replied with a quivery. No. All alone, then? You're absolutely sure? Yes, she snapped. And then you started screaming, and that's when the others came in. Yes, she cried. Yes, yes, yes. Branco flipped his notebook shut. Thank you, Miss Morrow. That's all for now. You can go. No, said Mathilda with a sneer. There is one more thing you should write in your disgusting report. We'll be taking your written statement shortly, said Branco. You can mention it there. Thank you. But I want to say it now, said Mathilda. I want you to write it in your report that one of Madama's brooches is missing from her jewelry box. Branco said with a sigh. Describe it, please. Mathilda described the missing piece as solid gold inlaid with onyx. Unique, one of a kind, from an admirer, and I recalled my recent conversation with Daphne. I didn't want to think when I was thinking that Daphne had slipped into Marcella's room during a lull in the police investigation and had recovered the stolen property back to its rightful owner. Herself. Daphne couldn't have done a thing like that, could she? It was more likely that Mathilda was lying and had appropriated the brooch for herself. Perhaps she even knew the sordid story of its intercontinental travels and was now taking advantage of a convenient opportunity to incriminate Daphne. Marcella Ostinata's death seemed to have released Mathilda from more than her mere servitude. Her newfound confidence bordered on criminally brazen. Then again, I suppose Daphne could just as well have made up her version of the story, too. She did tend to create drama where little existed. Like me. When Mathilda finally left the library, I mentioned to Branco the apparent contradiction that Marcella Ostinata would fuss about liquid potions, scratching her throat, but then sleep in the night air. Branco agreed, but added with a shrug, she was a soprano. They're made of inconsistencies. I guess you'd know your mother was one, Branco said curtly. My mother was a mezzo. That's a whole other ballgame. I forgave his flawed, though manly metaphor. The assisting sergeant on Branco's right asked him what he thought of Mathilda's story. Branco replied that whatever truth she told them still didn't amount to much. What he was after was the stuff Mathilda was obviously holding back. The little truths lurking between the big lies. The kinds of things a woman might tell her hairdresser, he said. The female cop on Branco's left guffawed, but Branco looked my way with a steady gaze, and I knew I'd been assigned my first mission as his deputy to conduct a private session with Mathilda using a hairstylist's special techniques for getting the real dirt. Branco called Maestro Toscanelli as his next witness. The maestro must have recognized Branco as a paesano, because his first words were, Posso mi interrogare in Italiano? No, replied Branco. In Inglese. Bin, said the maestro, and then fished through his jacket pockets until he produced a small package of cigarettes. I can smoke here, he said. Branco nodded, while the other two cops grimaced. As usual, though, the maestro was without a light. None of the cops could help him, so I leaped from my chair, big flick in hand as I held the flame for the maestro. Branco looked on with surprise. Closet smoker, I said sheepishly. Then I fetched an ashtray and placed it on the table near the maestro, and just as he had done those other times, he offered me a cigarette. And just as I'd done those other times, I declined. Branco addressed me impatiently. "Finished?" "Yes," I replied, and skulked back to my chair. He asked the maestro how long he'd known Madama Ostinata. "Ah," said the maestro, "molto pietragico is a big loss, no? Marcella has a long career. She was more famous in Europe than in America. I know her since her debut at La Scala. Was 1960 or something." Branco said, "Then you knew her well?" "I have no children," replied the maestro, "but Marcella was my daughter." "You mean she was like a daughter to you?" The maestro considered the question while taking a big drag from the cigarette. "I think that is right. Like a daughter, yes." "Tell me why you were in Madama Ostinata's room this morning." "I hear screaming, so I go to see what is wrong." "So it was Mathilda's voice that woke you up?" Yes," said the maestro. And then the maestro shrugged. "I see her there. What else? I have no thoughts, only shock." "Did you touch anything while you were in the room?" No. I thought I saw blood on your hands this morning." "Me? Blood here?" said the maestro, showing his palms. "Yes," said the cop. "Maybe you touched something with blood on it and you don't remember." "The knife, maybe. Did you pick up the knife?" The maestro chuckled. "Tenate," he said, acknowledging Branco's rank in Italian. "You make a bad joke. Why would I take the knife? I see Marcella on the bed like that, and I am in shock. It is like a scene on the stage, but worse." Branco grunted. "Much worse. But we have a witness who says you were holding the knife." It is not so," replied the maestro. "Tell me," said Branco, "did Marcella have any enemies?" I sensed Branco used the diva's first name to imply a common bond with the maestro, a trust based on operatic familiarity. Maestro Toscanelli's eyes danced with amusement. "Tenente, every person in opera has enemies. The singers, the musicians." He chuckled, then tapped at his chest with both hands and sent a tiny volley of ashes fluttering to his lap. "I have enemies. Tenente, even the stage workers. We all have enemies. It is natural in opera." Branco said, "Tell me about Marcella's enemies here." Marcella. Povera Marcella." The maestro shook his head sadly. "Her enemy in this country was herself. Marcella does not understand how to be, how you say, diplomatico." "But someone killed her," said Branco. The maestro shrugged helplessly. "Maybe it was a terrorist. Or else they say in your country you have many, He paused, uncertainly searching for a phrase that wasn't going to come easily. Branco was fast losing patience with the old man, though I sensed his conscience was directing him to respect his elders. Went the maestro, until finally he could say proudly, "Acts of random violence." He over-enunciated every syllable, as though he enjoyed the sensation of the strange English sounds and around his mouth. Branco said curtly, "Her death was not random violence." Then he stood up just as he had done during his questioning of Mathilda, and came round to the maestro's side of the big study table. The maestro followed the cop with his eyes, but then turned his attention back to his cigarette. Branco sat on the edge of the table and said, "Maestro, how will Marcella's death affect you? What will be different now?" "It is obvious, no?" said Maestro Toscanelli. "I have a new soprano, April Kilkis. She is young. She has not learned how to be a prima donna yet. She will sing Verdi the way he writes, not the way she feels." "Who cares what the soprano feels? Verdi knows, and he tells you what to do. You see the score and you do it." "And that wasn't the way with Marcella," said Branco. The maestro chuckled. Marcella was inventive. He seemed to like the word too. Inventive. Too much inventions. First, she uses the Rookie cadenzas. Then she makes her own. Much, much worse. And poor Verdi is like circus magic. Why didn't you stop her? Who can stop Marcella? Cantarla a Sadi. You sing to the death. They call Calas la Divina. But they call Marcella la Tempesta. So in a way, said Branco, you're a lot better off with her out of the picture. Said the maestro. The performance will probably be better without Marcella. The maestro made a little grunt, the same as Branco might have, and then extinguished his cigarette. I think, he said, this bello is the last time I conduct. I am old now, and I am tired, but I have enough force inside me for one more time. He shook a clenched fist strongly in the air. This will be the best Verdi I have done for my entire life. I ever dream it should be Falstaff, but he shrugged like an old philosopher. Bello is good too. It is Verdi's big love story. The setting we are using here is somewhat... The maestro bobbed his head from side to side. Is peculiar, he said, relishing the word. But I know Verdi is watching over me. He takes Marcella away and gives me instead April Kilkis. She will be La Meglior Amelia. Branco snorted loudly and said, I hardly think it was Verdi who cut Marcella Ostanada's throat. The maestro shrank visibly under Branco's words. Thank you, said Branco. That's all for now. Then the maestro left the library. Branco told his sergeant to arrange a personal guard for Jonathan Byers. From my place in the armchair, I asked him why. Branco was just about to tell me, but then he considered his two assistants, and so instead of answering my simple question, he snarled, I can't explain everything to you. His next witness was Bruce David, but instead of a self-absorbed and hypochondriacal tenor entering the library and walked Daphne Davenport. And truthfully, it felt as though the wind had changed and was now carrying fresh air into that room. Daphne walked directly to the broad wooden table and stood opposite the place where Lieutenant Branco sat. Excuse me, Lieutenant, she said. I hope you'll forgive my showing up out of turn, but I must tell you that Bruce David has suffered a serious nervous collapse. He's in no condition to speak to anyone. I've sedated him, and I'm looking after him now. I didn't realize what had happened until after I'd recovered myself this morning, but now I see that his condition is tenuous at best. A police investigation at this point is not only impossible, but the strain of it would put him over the top. As it is, depending on what I observe in the next 12 hours, I may be admitting him to McLean Hospital. That bad, said Branco flatly. In vulgar parlance, said Daphne. Bruce is a mess. Daphne had somehow rocketed to a new level of action. Who would have guessed at this point in her career that she would respond so readily to someone in psychological need? And here was Bruce David conveniently fallen flat on his emotional face. His collapse had launched her back into full force as an attending psychiatrist. Watching Daphne, I recognized yet again why I had failed as a therapist. She could relate to the patient with absolute objectivity and focus on the sickness. She even seemed able to engage her compassion as if she knew it would withstand the voracious needs of a patient in emotional distress. I'd always worried that my patients would suck me dry and then turn me crazy like them. That was basically why I left the psych clinic and took up hairstyling. Now, whenever that old feeling creeps in that someone is trying to snack on my emotions, I just turn the blow dryer up high and pull hard on the styling brush. Well then, said Lieutenant Branco, since you were next on my list, why don't I question you now, Miss Davenport? Of course, said Daphne. And as I had hoped and expected, Daphne began with a clear and simple statement of the facts. Like Parker, she had neither seen nor heard anything unusual around the big house until that morning, when Mathilda's extended and horrified screams came from Madama Ostanada's bedroom. It probably helped the tone of Daphne's statement that Branco seemed partial to her, and that was probably because Daphne was just a little older than his own recently dead mother. Of course, that same logic wouldn't apply to his earlier, more brutish treatment of the maestro, but that was a man, and psychobabblists could argue that the cop had unresolved father issues there. For my part, I'd challenge them that Branco was simply impatient with the histrionics of a sly old man who was trying to distract an investigative cop. When Branco asked Daphne if there was anything personal she felt the police ought to know regarding Madame Ostinata, Daphne said, "She was a wonderful singer, Lieutenant. She would have been an asset to the festival, and she was a guest in my house. I think that sums it up. No emotional upsets or difficulties of any kind." "None at all," Daphne answered firmly. "According to some, the woman was quite temperamental." Daphne brushed his comment off. "She was an artist, Lieutenant. It's part of their nature. Just the way it's part of a psychiatrist's nature to be cool and collected in times of crisis." "Yes," replied Daphne without a second's hesitation. "Did you and the dead woman ever argue?" Daphne's eyes flashed away from Branco and toward me for an instant as she replied, "Never, Lieutenant." Of course, I hadn't really expected Daphne to tell Branco about her long-lost brooch, the one she'd seen Madame Ostinata wearing or about the heated scene that had followed. I wonder if Mathilda had already confronted Daphne about its sudden disappearance from Marcella's jewelry case, and then I began to feel uncomfortable. Branco had deputized me, and at the time it had seemed a major coup. I mean, how many hairdressers do you know who fetch for a super macho cop? But now I saw trouble ahead. Daphne had befriended me, and that too was a major coup, simply because she was such a wonderful, energizing person. But already there were big holes in her answers to Branco's questions. So what was I to do? Snitch to Branco now? Confront Daphne later? Both choices were loathsome. The only clear action at the moment was no action. Some detective I was going to make. Branco thanked Daphne for her time. I realized that during his session with her, he hadn't stood up and gone around to her side of the table. Maybe there was no pattern to his terror tactics after all. On Daphne's way out, as she passed my armchair, she winked at me, and I almost winked back, but my face was directly in Branco's sightline, so I just smiled. For his last witness in the household, Branco called Maurizio, the young handyman. Moments later, Maurizio entered the library. He was wide-eyed and frightened, like a small nocturnal creature, and he wasn't alone. Daphne accompanied him. "Lieutenant," she said, "since Maurizio is deaf and mute, I thought it would help if I stayed here as his interpreter." "Can he read and write?" said Branco. Daphne said yes. At that exact moment, Maurizio nodded. "Looks like he reads lips too," said Branco. Again, a simultaneous nod from Maurizio and a yes from Daphne. But as it turned out, one of Branco's assistants, the female officer, was fluent in American Sign Language and would be able to interrogate Maurizio that way. Daphne insisted on staying in the library, if only to comfort him. Branco resisted. "We're hardly going to hurt him," he said. Daphne retorted, "And I'm hardly going to put words in his mouth, Lieutenant." Branco finally yielded, probably out of mother guilt or else plain weariness from the long day of interrogations. Before Maurizio sat down in the chair opposite Lieutenant, he gazed around the library and caught sight of me. I gave him a small, friendly smile, but in return I got a squint-eyed scowl. Maurizio nudged himself closer to Daphne as if to get further away from me, now perceived as a consort to the cops. Then he sat down and Daphne stood near him. Branco asked his first question. "Where were you last night?" His assistant recreated the query with hand gestures while she mouthed the words silently to Maurizio. Maurizio answered the assistant cop with a flurry of hand motions, and then the cop said to Branco, "He says he was with him." She gestured toward me with her thumb. Branco raised an eyebrow. "No," I protested. Branco held up his hand. "Quiet, you!" Branco asked Maurizio, "Where was that?" Arm's hand mouse moved between Maurizio and the female cop. Then she interpreted to Branco. "In his cottage." "What time did you leave Mr. Kraychik's cottage?" Maurizio interpreted reply. "I stayed with him until we had breakfast." I stood up and faced Branco. "Wait just a minute," I said. Branco snapped. I said be quiet. Daphne said to Branco, there is a discrepancy, Lieutenant. I don't care, said Branco. Quiet now or else. Next question. Did Stan leave the college at any time during the night? Answer, an emphatic no. Question, how can you be sure? Answer, my arms were wrapped around him. Branco looked my way with a smug grin. I think this young man is trying to protect you. I wonder if you'd do the same for him. I thought you wanted the truth, I muttered. Branco replied, I think I may be getting it now. Lieutenant, I did not kill that singer. Oh, I know that, said Branco. I was referring to the truth about your escapades. He's embroidering, I said. I was alone last night. Branco was about to ask Maurizio his next question, but first turned to me for one more jab. How long did you say your partner has been away? I didn't say, Lieutenant, but it's been about a week. Branco shook his head ruefully. Doesn't seem long at all, he said. Then he asked Maurizio his next question. Did you know the woman who was killed? Maurizio looked confused by the question. He gazed up at Daphne for reassurance. She placed her hand on his shoulder and nodded kindly. It's all right, she said. You can tell the lieutenant. But Maurizio had no answer. His eyes flashed around the library, first at me, then at Branco, then up at Daphne again. Branco repeated his question. Maurizio's eyes became panic-stricken. It's very easy, said Branco. Yes or no? You knew her or you didn't? The interpreting cop sent volleys of hand signs to Maurizio, who responded by holding his hands up in front of him as if protecting himself. By that point, he'd begun to cry. Daphne interceded. Lieutenant, I assume you're going to take a written statement from all of us? That's right. Then why not let Maurizio just write his statement now? Because I want that question answered, said the cop. But you've upset him. Miss Davenport, I agreed to let you stay here while I questioned this young man because you insisted that he needed the comfort of a familiar person. But I can't let you rise to his defense every time he gets a little flustered. Why not? Said Daphne. Someone has to. He certainly doesn't understand his rights, not in a criminal case like this. There are specific questions I want to ask him. But I sensed that Branco was purposely trying to disarm Maurizio, who was an easy target for his bully. Branco had a cruel streak that showed itself at odd moments. I'd experienced it myself back when he first discovered I was involved with Rafik. But for Branco to terrorize someone like Maurizio, who was already challenged by daily life, seemed despicable. Branco pressed his questions once more to Maurizio. Did you know the woman who was killed? But Maurizio was no longer paying any attention to the interpreting cop. He turned toward Daphne and buried his face in the folds of her dress. His strong body sobbed violently. I wanted to go to him and hold him, but Daphne seemed able to handle it all just fine without me. Branco said to his assistants, I'll finish with him later. Let's call it quits for today. Can I take him away now? Said Daphne. Sure, replied Branco. While his assistants put their papers in order, Branco came over to me. I stood up. Lieutenant, I really did sleep alone last night. It's all right, Stan, he said. You're a big boy. But I'm not like that. Like what? Said the cop. When I'm involved with someone, I'm monogamous. Unless they hide out in my bedroom and jump my bones in the dark. It takes all kinds, he said dismissively. His remark confused me. Then again, if Branco had really employed prostitutes and had beat them no less, he certainly didn't have much argument against anyone else's sexual morals. Branco said, I'd like that security report back now. Sure, I said as I handed him the report. Find anything interesting? I'm not sure, I said. But in truth, I'd found a tasty tidbit that I planned to follow up on the next morning. Branco said, just remember while you're working for me, I'm the first one you tell whatever you find. Something is that clear? Oh, yeah, I replied. Good, said Branco, and he returned to his assistants. There was no need to tell him that I'd withheld the story of Daphne's wayward brooch and how its subsequent discovery had caused friction between Daphne and Marcella Ostinata. I'd learned all that before I was officially Branco's deputy, or so far as I was concerned, it didn't officially come up under category of tell me first. By the time the three cops had packed up and were leaving the house, Daphne met them in the foyer. She discreetly detained Branco after the two assistants were out the door. "Would you like to stay for dinner, Lieutenant?" Branco wavered. "I wouldn't think you'd want to see much more of me around here, not after that last session." "Lieutenant, I realize you were just doing your job." "That's right, ma'am. There's nothing personal intended." Branco looked around the vast foyer and said, "But I think dinner in a place like this might be a little too formal for me." "Don't worry about that," said Daphne. "We don't usually dress for dinner here." That sounded provocative, especially with Branco at the table. Then Daphne added, "Though I'll bet you're smashing in a dinner jacket." Branco nodded pleasantly. "Right now, Miss Davenport, I think socializing in your house could be construed as a conflict of interest." "Goodness," said Daphne, "that bad?" Branco said, "The fact is, someone killed that woman, and the person may be under this roof right now." "Then I should think you'd want to stay for dinner as part of your investigation," replied Daphne. Branco smiled. "I'll take a rain check." "And I'll hold you to it, Lieutenant. You saved my life today." "I saved you from falling, ma'am, that's all." "I might have broken my neck." "Glad to have spared you that." "I should say so," said Daphne with a chortle. As Branco was halfway out the door, he turned back and asked Daphne if he could see Bruce David. "But he's under sedation," said Daphne. "I thought I told you." "You did," said Branco. "I just want to see him." "Are you checking up on me, Lieutenant?" "Like you said, ma'am, I'm not. I'm just doing my job." So Daphne took Branco upstairs. I watched them ascend the staircase together, and I recalled Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious. Sometimes I think I have an Ingrid Bergman complex. Moments later, Branco was cantering down the stairs alone. At the front door, he stopped and spoke to me, a murmur from my ears alone. "Miss Davenport is staying with Bruce David now. I saw him, and he does appear to be semi-conscious. Still, I'd like you to keep an eye on him for me. Try to get some more facts on his condition. I want to be sure that woman isn't protecting him." "I feel like a spy, Lieutenant." "You're a natural," said Branco. I didn't know whether to be flattered or insulted, but then he was gone. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.